Back in the early 90s, we used to live in Dundry, a small village in the UK. On the opposite side of our house is an old church that was built in the 15th century. They used to bury criminals outside the cemetery, where the house we rented was built in the 18th century. It was quite a big L-shaped house, with 2 wings and 2 floors, and the house was originally a butcher's house. For some reason, whenever it rained, there was a musky sulfur-type smell. Our parents went on a holiday, so my atheist uncle came to babysit me and my sister, who were 3 and 4 years old at the time. After my uncle had finished putting us back to bed, he went to relax in our guest room, which was next to the bottom of the staircase that leads to the upper wing, where me and my sister shared a room. All was quiet for a few hours, and in the early hours of the morning my uncle was up. He starts hearing faint creaking sounds coming from the upstairs hallway, and thought nothing of it. After a while he hears those creaking sounds again, but this time a bit louder, and went upstairs to investigate, as he thought me and my sister had gotten up to use the bathroom. He checks our rooms and sees that we're both asleep in our beds, and goes back down to the guest room. It was silent for a while, and he starts hearing that creaking sound again from the hallway upstairs, and gets up to go have a look for the second time. As he's climbing the stairs, he realizes that the creaking sound turns into footsteps. Those footsteps coming from the left hallway take a right turn and start coming down the stairs towards him. My uncle leans against the railing and the footsteps walk past him and continue down the end of the hallway into our living room, where the fireplace was, and the butcher shop, as the second wing was added later. He starts freaking out and turns on all the lights downstairs. He waits for a while. The sounds stopped, and he did not hear them again. When he told my parents, they had the local pastor come to our house and give it a blessing, and apparently those footsteps weren't heard from again. Our uncle and my parents only told this later on when we were older. I think it's really interesting, since I'm very skeptical of the paranormal, and so is my uncle. My sister was at a bar with her girlfriend, who ended up ditching her at the bar for someone else. At this point she is already super drunk, but because she was just ditched by her girlfriend, she decided to take a few more shots. The bartender kicks her out of the bar because she is being sloppy, blackout drunk. It's the dead of winter in Minnesota, and this is before everyone had cell phones, so she starts to walk, but it's snowing and it's icy. And all that she has for warmth is a thin coat. She keeps falling and landing in the ditch. Eventually she just laid there and closed her eyes and started falling asleep. She's told me that she was startled awake by someone yelling, "Wake up!" but she didn't see anyone around. Almost blackout drunk and covered in snow, she made it the 2 miles home. She woke up in the entryway of her house soaking wet. I don't believe in supernatural stuff really, but she thinks someone was looking out for her. Before I start this story, I would like to say that I don't believe in ghosts. That being said, I have no explanation for the following story. Perhaps you do. In December of 2018, my partner, our 18-month-old son and I moved to a very old terrace house. We moved because we were in a 2-bedroom flat in a rough area, and my manager's mother had recently moved to a care home and she was keen to rent the house to someone she knew. A bit of background on the house itself. It is part of a terrace of 5 houses. The start of the terrace is a pub, and then there were 3 houses and then our house, another house, and then a driveway that led to an area of private woodland, accessible only to the residents of the house. As you can imagine, with an 18-month-old boy, having a garden and small area of private woodland was an amazing selling point. The house was very old. It appeared that at some point the rows of houses may have once been a building that was split into separate dwellings later on. We were able to find a photo taken of the pub showing the row of houses from 1908. My manager believed at some point the building was used as a school, but I couldn't find anything to confirm that. The front door to the house opened directly onto the pavement outside, leading into the living room. Directly opposite the front door on the far wall of the lounge was an archway leading to the kitchen. On walking into the kitchen, the stairs leading upstairs are just on the wall to the left. The stairs went upwards towards the front of the house. Just opposite the start of the staircase was a door to the conservatory, and the door to the garden was directly on the left when entering the conservatory. The window in the kitchen looked directly into the conservatory, and the conservatory door opened to the top of a small set of stairs leading to the garden. Walking up the stairs in the kitchen to the first floor leads to a wall. Turning left at the top of the stairs looks directly at our bedroom door. Another door is on the same wall to the left of ours, which led to our son's room, and at the end of the short corridor was the door to the bathroom. I appreciate this is a lot of detail, but the layout is somewhat important to understand the strange stuff that happened. As I said, we moved in December. We only had one day to do everything, so I began moving our stuff across from midnight, loading up the car, driving to the house, emptying everything into the lounge, and going back to the flat to get more. I think it took a total of 10 runs to get everything, and by the time my father-in-law arrived next morning, we were able to move the larger things with a van. From the moment I opened the front door that night, I felt slightly unsettled. Due to the layout of the house, there was a clean view through the lounge, through the straight kitchen to the conservatory. I didn't like something about the conservatory. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I just found the place ominous. It's worth noting that once we did get moved in, that feeling went pretty quickly, so it was likely just the natural spookiness of an old empty house in the early hours. For the first few months, nothing particularly interesting happened. The occasional strange sound that could easily be explained by the age of the house and pipes. But the first spooky incident occurred during the middle of the night. Our son was teething and often needed Calpol during the night, a kind of child pain relief. We kept the Calpol in the kitchen, so I went down, filled the syringe with Calpol, gripped it between my teeth so my hands were free to open the baby gate, then started to head upstairs. About 3 steps up, a shadow rushed past the stairs as if moving from the lounge door to the conservatory door. This was accompanied by a whooshing sound and a physical sensation of the air shifting from something moving quickly. What was particularly spooky was that our microwave was on the work surface, meaning the light from the clock was visible from the stairs. As the shadow flew past, it clearly blocked my view of the light from the clock for a split second. Naturally, I ran up the stairs as fast as I could, gave my son his Calpol, and spent an hour trying to convince myself the shadow was caused by the syringe in my mouth getting between the light of the microwave and my eye. I tried to replicate this the following night for a while, but there was no conceivable way or position I could put myself or the syringe in that would cause anything like the shadow I had witnessed. Nothing else happened for at least 6 months. Then one night, myself and my partner woke up to an almighty crash from our son's room, and him screaming. We jumped up and got to his room no more than 10 seconds after the crash, and found our son in the middle of his bedroom around 8 feet from his bed, laying on the floor crying in his sleep. He had a bed rail on his bed, and had never once fallen out, and even if he had, how far he had gotten from the bed, and the volume of the crash made no sense. We got him back to bed, and both pretended we believed that somehow he'd fallen from it. Another few months went by, and when taking my son to bed, the next creepy incident occurred. We had a very consistent routine. We'd go upstairs and brush our teeth. My son would then run to his bedroom, followed by me. Occasionally he'd close the door and pretend to hold it shut as a game, so when his bedroom door closed, I assumed that's what was happening. I gently pushed against the door to pretend I couldn't get in, and the door slammed shut ridiculously hard. If my fingers had been in the door, they would have come off. There was absolutely no way my infant son could push the door that hard. I told my son to let go of the door and pushed it with all of my might, but couldn't get it to open. It was stuck shut. The door would open slightly and get pushed back against me, as if someone was on the other side pushing against it. I shouted for my son to let go of the door, and he shouted back. His voice was clearly coming from his bed around 10 feet from the door. Then all the resistance stopped. I flew through the door to find my son in his bed, as he said he was. There was no way he could have gotten from the door to under the covers, in his bed, in that split second it took for me to push the door open. Everything until that point I could explain, in unlikely but possible scenarios. The syringe causing the shadows, my son falling from bed. But that one I could not explain. I still can't to this day. My son was too young to really understand when I asked him what was holding the door shut, so I never got any answer if he saw anything. He didn't seem scared though. I think he thought I was pretending I couldn't get in to make him laugh. After we didn't have many problems, until the last day I spent at the house. We bought a house and moved everything across. I had to go back to the house one last time to pick up the few last bits and have a clean. I waited until my son was in bed, so I went to the old house at around 8 p.m. in winter. It was quite dark. I spent an hour in the house, and the best way I can describe it was like a haunted house from a movie. I could hear footsteps running around upstairs while I was downstairs. Not like occasional footsteps. It sounded like my son and his friends did when they were running around upstairs. The only time it stopped was when I started walking up the stairs. I hoovered upstairs, and while doing so, the conservatory door downstairs slammed itself shut. When I hoovered downstairs, all 3 upstairs doors slammed shut one after another, all so hard the house shook. When cleaning under the stairs, I could actually hear someone walking down them. The stairs had gaps between them. It was sort of like a floating staircase. So, I'd have seen someone's feet if they were there. And alas, I didn't see a thing. But the footsteps I could clearly hear pass over my head and reach the bottom of the staircase. Then I began hear talking upstairs. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like a man arguing. That was my limit. I decided that anything I'd left behind at that point wasn't worth keeping. I grabbed the hoover, ran to the car, and never went back. My manager sold the house after we moved out. I have no idea if the lady that bought the house had any problems, but I definitely wouldn't want to go back. I had moved to London from my hometown, and had at that point experienced a couple of paranormal experiences. I had moved into my first house share independent of my uncle, who had put me up when I first moved over to London. The apartment block was modern, red brick, and a nice place in a leafy part of North London. The first weird thing that happened was my South African person I shared the apartment with asked me one evening why I was walking so slowly to the bathroom at night, that my footsteps were so slow, and he wanted to know in a jokey way if I was sleepwalking. I knew for a fact I didn't go to the bathroom. I just joked and brushed it off. Funny thing was, I heard weird slow footsteps on the floorboards at different times, but thought nothing much of it. Several weeks after this, another strange thing happened. I used to have this little lamp. It was like those metal tubes with lights on the top of it. It was small, but it was a nice little bedside reading lamp, more decorative than functional. The thing is, to turn it off you had to press the switch on the electrical cord, and I remember waking up one morning when I categorically remember switching it off before I fell asleep. I have an excellent memory, and was neither drinking nor eating before. But the craziest thing to come was a few months earlier. I had returned late on a Sunday evening from a weekend in Europe with my friends. I got home, turned on the TV, and sat on the floor and rested with my back against the sofa. I then decided to open a can of beer and look at the TV. But what happened next was insane. But it happened. When I was watching TV, a pillow from the sofa came over my head and landed directly on the tin of beer in between my legs and spilled all over the carpet. I literally ran to the front door and started hyperventilating. It was that scary. I used to live alone, which made it so much worse. I needed the TV on. Every light in the house was on, and I was in a constant state of paranoia after that. Things calmed down, and occasionally I would get these feelings like I wasn't alone. An atmosphere, unpleasant and hard to describe. One night I came back from the city centre after my birthday. It was late. I went to go to bed, and of course the house was fully lit up. Just as I was starting to get into the sleepy zone, I heard this knock-knock. It was the indisputable sound of a knuckle hitting a hollow door. It was one knock. I could have questioned myself, but there was intelligence there, and it was like it was done right beside my room. It sounds like it's next door. I froze, and I mean froze, and said, "That's enough. I can't take it anymore." I started looking for a new house to share and was gone within 2 weeks. After all my experiences accumulating up, I started to realize I might be sensitive to the paranormal. I subsequently found out the building was originally built for the mentally ill and was sold off to developers in the 70s. Go figure. This happened to me when I was about 11 years old. It was the 90s. I've lived my whole life in El Paso, Texas. The culture is rich in folklore and religious beliefs. Many Hispanic families have stories of the paranormal. One popular legend is that of the Weeping Woman, or La Llorona. The legend of La Llorona, Spanish for Weeping Woman, has been a part of Hispanic culture in the Southwest since the days of the conquistadores. The tall, thin spirit is said to be blessed with natural beauty and long flowing dark hair, wearing a white gown. She roams the rivers and creeks, wailing into the night, searching for children to drag and scream to a watery grave after taking the lives of her own. No one really knows where the legend of La Llorona came from. Though the tales vary from source to source, the one common thread is that she is the spirit of a doomed mother who drowned her children and now spends eternity searching for them in rivers and lakes. One night, just like any other night, I was living in a trailer with my mum and dad. My youngest brother was staying with my aunt this night, and I fell asleep watching Jay Leno as usual, and when I woke up I was on the sofa in my living room. The time was 4 a.m., which illuminated from the stove in the kitchen. The television was off, and normally I had the light on, but this time it was pitch dark. I woke up, and I heard this horrible screaming that was coming far off in the distance. The screaming was coming from a ditch that was a few feet away from my home. I heard it and I thought I was hearing things, and I asked myself, am I dreaming? Then I started to hear the animals outside howling and whimpering. These animals that I speak of are cats and dogs. As the screaming got closer, the animals continued to cry. The screaming was something I have never experienced before or since. It sounded like I was in a big hallway, and the woman was screaming her guts out down the hallway. Then in all the screaming, I started to make out words. These words being said by whoever it was at 4 a.m. screaming their guts out shocked me. The woman kept saying, "Ay, mis hijos," "Oh, my children," in English. In a huge panic, I quickly got up from the sofa and ran to the kitchen, which was right next to where I was asleep. I flicked on the closet light and turned around, but the screaming didn't stop. In fact, it was only getting louder and closer. At that moment, I questioned my sanity. Was I going crazy or hearing things? Then I thought to myself, this is real, and the animals are responding to it in a negative way. So I did what any other 11-year-old boy would do in a moment like this. I ran to my parents' room. I reached for my mum and shook her awake wildly. She woke up slowly, and to my amazement, the screaming faded away as she woke up. I thought to myself, what the heck's going on? I asked my mum if she heard the screaming. My mum was half asleep and said, "Go back to sleep. It's all in your head." I asked her, pleaded with her to listen, that it was real. My mum quickly said, "You're dreaming. Go back to sleep, it'll be okay." By that point, the screaming had faded, a long way away. Like whoever it was screaming knew that an adult was awake. I was terrified. I returned to the living room and quickly turned on the TV, as I left most of the lights on too, and I didn't go back to sleep until the sun came up. I couldn't believe what I heard and witnessed. I was being treated like a crazy person whenever I shared the story. It got so bad that I kept my experience to myself, and to this day I don't care what people think of my experience because I know what I heard. A few years later, it happened to me again, but that's a whole nother story. This is something that happened to me when I was little. I think it was the evening. I had been left at home by myself. This happened often, and I was watching TV and was getting pretty bored. I went over to the window and opened it. I can't remember why. Perhaps a change of scenery. When suddenly the window of the apartment next door opened, and a girl jumped onto the windowsill and leaned half her body out the window. I remember she looked to be 2 to 3 years older than me, and I hadn't met her before. We struck up a conversation. I can't remember what we spoke about completely, but I remember that she said, "Let's play outside." I said that I wasn't allowed to open the door. "Jump out the window like me. Come on, hurry up," she said as she jumped. I climbed onto the windowsill and got ready to jump out. That's when I heard a scream coming from behind me. The next thing I knew, I was being pulled backwards and hit the floor with a thud. I looked up and saw my mum looming over me. I've never seen her look so angry. We live on the 4th floor, so I know that if I'd have jumped, I wouldn't have been walking away with minor injuries. I'd most certainly have perished. As the years passed, I grew up thinking, what if Mum was a little later home that night? Incidentally, there were no children living next door. That's what my mum said at the time. I pleaded with her to go check. I was adamant I'd seen the young girl jump from the next door's window. The old couple next door said there was no girl there. They didn't have a child that age or any visiting grandchildren. I was branded a liar by my mum and banned from snacks for a week, although amnesty was achieved on the 3rd day of the ban. Perhaps it was a product of my imagination. Who knows? Maybe I was seeing things, but it seemed so real. Whenever I heard about a child falling from a window to their death on the news, it always reminded me of what happened to me. I think a lot of the newer buildings have fail-safe systems in place where the windows don't fully open. But if your window does fully open, then please keep an eye on your children. Or in my case, if someone asks you to jump from them and play with them, don't do it. I don't care if I sound like an idiot. It can happen. It happened to me. I'm a 37-year-old female. The house where I grew up is over 100 years old and my parents still live there. My dad has actually lived in that house his entire life, and my grandparents built out the attic space into 2 additional bedrooms when he was a kid. The back bedroom of the upstairs was the room my sister and I shared when we were kids and is directly above our living room. There have been so many times when I would be alone in the house and in the living room where there would be a crashing sound coming up in our room. I'd run upstairs, but nothing was ever out of place. I didn't say anything for years because I figured no one would believe me. When I eventually told my mum and sister, they looked kind of shocked, but both admitted they'd been hearing the same noise for years. When I was 16, I was playing Super Mario World in the alcove of my bedroom. I was facing the window with my back to the rest of the room. When you start a level in the game, the screen kind of fades to black for maybe a second or two. When this happened, I could see the reflection of a man standing behind me. Thinking it was my dad, I whipped around to ask how he managed to sneak up the stairs, as they creaked like crazy. But there was no one there. I reset the console over and over, but the man was gone. I told my dad what he saw, and he seemed a little spooked before he told me that I had just described his father, who died before I was born. After that, he refused to acknowledge that we had ever had that conversation and believed that I was just seeing things. The last big occurrence happened when I was 17. This was before the house had central air, so the summers were spent with the windows open to circulate, and I had the front door open but there was no breeze that day. I was playing on a computer when the front door swung shut and latched. Now, a 100-year-old door has to be latched in a very specific way, and I froze when I heard footsteps going from the front door past me and into the kitchen. As the footsteps went past me, I heard the sound of a woman humming. To this day, I get freaked out when I'm alone in that house, even though I know there probably isn't anything malicious there. I'm going to share with you something that happened over 22 years ago. I was visiting my mother in Texas over the summer, and I had to sleep in the living room. Sometimes my little brothers would come in and we'd all sleep on the floor and just talk. Joke around and prank each other as one does. My aunt at the time was fighting breast cancer, and she chose to go home and pass there rather than at the hospital, so we were all kind of just waiting for it to happen. Well, one night, me, Trey, and Jevon are all in the living room, and Trey is sleeping. It's about 1 to 2 a.m., and I hear heavy breathing in the room, and I look up to see if someone is in the doorway leading to the kitchen, but no one's there. I asked Jevon if he heard it, and he said he had. Then we both got really quiet again, and it happened again, almost like someone was taking deep breaths right next to us. I go down to where Trey was sleeping and cover his mouth slightly and tell Jevon to hold his breath, and I can still hear it. All of a sudden it stopped, so I took the time to get up and walk to the kitchen to see if my mum's boyfriend was there, and their door was closed. Not even 5 minutes later the phone rang, and it was my aunt's husband telling my mum that she had passed away a few moments ago. To this day I still think she came by to see everyone before she went. Makes me spooked whenever I think about it, to be honest. When you are home alone at night, it can be pretty creepy sometimes, right? Even as a kid, I tried to avoid reading any of my scary stories or watching creepy things at night. This happened one night when I was home alone. My parents were out late. They didn't leave me home alone all that often, and they would only do it maybe once a year. I didn't ever mind. It was pretty fun having dinner, watching TV, and hanging out in my room. That was, of course, until nighttime came. That night I lay in bed and was thinking of watching something on TV, probably eating some snacks, when I heard a knock on the door. I'll always remember this. There were 3 quick knocks. I ignored it. It was parents' advice, and they told me that if anyone came to the door while they were gone, I wasn't supposed to answer it. Then I heard something else. There was the unmistakable sound of someone walking down the stairs towards the door. My body became instantly stiff, because I knew that there was no one home except for me. I tried my best to force my heart to calm down, but it just kept on beating faster. I remember saying to myself, "Calm down, there's no need to panic. Come on, you're not a kid anymore." I told myself that, but I wasn't sure I was listening. The footsteps seemed to stop midway down the stairs, and I scared myself with the notion of whether the owner of those footsteps was going down or coming back up. After a few moments, I somehow managed to convince myself that I was hearing things. I didn't want to be freaked out anymore, so I put my headphones back on and searched for some kind of comedy show on my phone. I could still hear rumbles coming from within the house. It was natural to hear house settling noises because our house was pretty old, so I tried not to allow my imagination to run away with itself. Then I heard a horrendous thud, and it sounded like something very heavy was hitting the ground. Sweat began to drip down my back. I really didn't know what to do, but I managed to find enough confidence to use the bathroom when the house seemed still. Usually I can't sleep unless the lights are off. I mean, even a blue charging light is enough for me to turn on my side and bury my face in the pillow. However, that night there was no chance that I would be sleeping in the dark. I lay in bed for a while, but I wasn't able to fall asleep. I felt as if I needed to know what the sources of the sounds were. I managed to psych myself up enough to leave my room and run to the landing. I figured that if I hit the lights in the landing, then that would be enough to relieve myself of anxiety. If I hit the lights and saw that there was no one stopped on the stairs like my ears told me, then maybe I'd get a decent night's sleep. I was wrong. I ran out to the hallway, and before I could hit the lights, I saw a dark, shadowy figure halfway down the stairs. I knew that figure. The outline was unmistakable. It looked exactly like the guy who lived in our neighborhood. The guy that lived, as it happened, right behind our house. He lived alone in a detached house. I was terrified to see him in our house, especially when I was home alone. Not because I felt I was in any danger, simply because I knew what I was seeing could not possibly be true, as I knew for a fact that the man had passed away. His sister found him. He had decided to end things himself. It was sad, but our families were never really acquainted. We lived in the same neighborhood but didn't talk much except for the odd hello. It made no sense why he would be here. I thought to myself, why did you come here? The moment that thought had registered in my brain, I heard myself begin to scream. I knew that I was home alone, and that no one would answer my scream, but I screamed anyway. But then something happened. After I let out that scream, it seemed as if I calmed myself. I don't know why, but once I was able to confirm the identity of the person in my house, I stopped feeling so scared. Stood there for a while, and I watched him just stand there staring at me. After 30 seconds or so, he crouched down, and I felt as if I wasn't in danger, so I returned to my room and slept with the lights off. I felt so secure. I cannot explain this shift in me. I really don't know. I slept soundly, so unafraid. It would be years later that I would learn that the presence in our house was the reason for our family move. It wasn't just me who experienced the figure on the stairs. Both my parents admitted to being frightened of a black shadow there. It seemed as if I was the only one who seemed to be at ease with it. It was years later now, and somehow I'm waiting for the night I'm visited again, but I wouldn't know what to tell my husband if it happened. I worked for a state forest service in the tri-state area several years ago in a field location that was a 250-plus-year-old farmhouse. The basement was dug in compacted earth. There were large fireplaces in several rooms. A few still even had pot hooks for them to heat water or cooking. There was one bathroom that had been installed in the 1940s. Prior to that, there had been none. The floorboards were wide slats of pine, and you could see the hand-forged nails holding them in place. In some areas, they were far enough apart that you could shine a flashlight down through the crack to see the basement floor. Mice and camel crickets were common. They were just a fact of life, and we lived with it, as was the ancient oil furnace that we had in the basement that broke frequently. Another odd fact was that down in the dug earth basement, in the farthest and darkest corner, there was a dark room for developing film. I had never ventured in there, as it never really bothered me. I'm now going to share the stories in a loose order, as it had been 14 years now since I worked there. I always felt watched there. It was a constant feeling that remained until I got in my car to leave at night. There were often strange smells, sometimes like rose water and oranges that had warm associations, but sometimes like rotten garbage, even when no trash was present. There was a kitchen that had been slightly modernized on at least 2 occasions. All the cabinet doors would be shut in the morning, and then, as I was upstairs working in my office, I would hear them all open, come back downstairs, and find them wide open. The moment you walk in the door in the morning, it was as if you felt all eyes turn on you. Our one secretary dealt with this by very loudly announcing "Good morning" to the existing inhabitants, as she was often the first one in, and said that she didn't necessarily feel threatened, but if she started hearing too many noises while she was alone, she would say out loud, "Y'all know I don't want to be hearing this," I don't mess with you, so don't mess with me. And she said it on some occasions and it would stop, but not always. The first time I remember seeing something physical was when we had meetings going on downstairs, and I ventured upstairs to fetch a chapstick out of my bag. My back was to the main hallway, and all of a sudden I heard a set of footsteps rush past me. I turned and saw two shadowy people, one shorter than the other one, flash down the hallway and into a back office, making footsteps the whole way. On another occasion, concerning footsteps, our secretary and I were in the office on a winter morning. Just the two of us, and the heater was broken again. We sat in the same room downstairs trying to stay warm with a space heater. We couldn't use the fireplaces. They were shut and full of who knows what after decades of non-use. We were laughing and talking when all of a sudden we hear very loud boots clomping up the steps. We look at each other and paused. At this point we were used to these kind of shenanigans and felt that it was best to not let it bother us. We lost 2 cleaning people in the evening after a few of us had gone home, as we never had more than 6 in the office, and that was a busy day. We had a cleaning service come to do the vacuuming and try and help out with the pest issue by assuring the trash was taken out, etc. Each night the cleaning man was to fill out a journal that was left on my boss's cabinet to tell us what he did. After he'd been there a while, he told us in the journal that he heard his name being called while he was vacuuming. This happened multiple times and he would turn the vacuum off and it was silent. Finally. He said he knocked on the wall and at first nothing happened. Then he knocked, "Shave a haircut," and there was a response of 2 knocks. He quit. My boss had a bad habit of working later in the house after dusk, and I would sometimes work with her, but we would never stay past 6:30 or so. It just wasn't a good idea. It was as though it was that house's time, and we didn't want to intrude on it, like a mutual respect. I know it sounds strange. Before she started putting a cap on her evening hours, one night she was working alone at her desk facing out into the hallway when she saw a very tall shadow person pass by the doorframe, slowly, not running like the ones I saw. She said it had to be at least 7 feet tall. It scared her so badly. And on another occasion she was working late, and a giant blue orb about the size of a soccer ball with electrical-looking energy came off it and went down the same hallway, past her door, and crashed into a metal filing cabinet we had at the end of the hallway. On another occasion, she was working on a project in our large meeting room, which had likely been a dining room at some point, and was engrossed in what she was doing, oblivious to her surroundings, when she looked up and locked eyes with a dark-haired man who appeared to be in his mid-40s in 19th century dress with grey eyes. She said he looked as surprised as she was that she could see him, and saw daylight pass straight through him. He turned to go towards the main stairwell and disappeared. She yelled out, understandably startled, and the secretary and I came running to see what was wrong. None of us saw him again, though we did give him a name based on what we knew of the house's history. In retrospect, I'm not sure the name was correct, but we tried to be respectful. In that same room, I was simply passing through one afternoon when I mentally heard a woman's voice say, with great agitation, "This is my house." A tired old trope, I know, but there is validity to it when considered in the context that when a canal was being dug in the 1830s near the property, the state was purchasing tracts of land from residents in order to make room for the canal. Later, in the 1960s, the state began purchasing large tracts of land in order to preserve them as state parks, one lot being where this house is located. I began leaving a recorder running overnight in different areas of the house, and there were 2 rooms where I recorded the most. One was in the oldest section of the house, what was once a family room, and the other were the servants' bedrooms upstairs, one of which was my office. I should note that this house is located in a very rural area. There's a canal nearby that's now used only for recreational kayaking and fishing, and a series of hiking and horse trails too, but no city sounds or noise interfere from neighbors. When I left the recorder downstairs in the family room, On multiple occasions I would play the recorder back the next day and capture beautiful piano music. It sounded faint, but clearly audible. Classical music. We also experienced the scent of fresh pine in this room for no apparent reason, over and over again. The other, far less happy sounds were of a gruff man's voice, and the sound of at least 2 children crying. I could never make out what the man was saying, and would be taking a guess as to what the children were saying. But it always sounded like, "I want my mummy." This is the most troubling memory I have of that house. No one likes to think children suffered. I began going to the local Hall of Records for the township and doing some research, which was a great experience that I highly recommend, on the deeds and wills associated with the various individuals who had owned the house throughout the generations. Most were handwritten and spoke of chain as a length of measure and stone markers of rocks around where the land boundaries were. I found out the names through the most recent family to live in the house in 1967, who by then was renting it from the state. One particular family had been on the property for nearly 100 years, and I had a chance to find a living relative. I did, and I contacted her via email to ask if she would like to visit the house, and she did. She was in her late 80s, but was a cousin of the family who was still living in the house in the 1930s and visited frequently as a child. Her mind was clear, and I asked her if the family room is where they would set up a Christmas tree and point to it. She said it was. She knew that I had been doing some research on the house, and I asked her if her uncle, who lived with the family but was unmarried and died in 1950, played the piano. And she said he did, and that he played beautifully. She was young in the 1930s, and I didn't want to trouble or scare her with the details of what had been going on in the house. I just treated it like a nostalgic event for her. This obviously doesn't explain all the other myriad events in the house, including the apparitions in clothing from different time periods, but it explained 2 small pieces of the puzzle. We continued to have experiences there, as well as our contractors, such as 2 young men we hired to repair flashing on the roof, and they continually blamed each other for tools vanishing and reappearing in strange, unrelated places. We had to do our own cleaning because we couldn't retain a cleaning person, and on another occasion, we had a visitor use the bathroom where there was a slatted door closed facing the toilets. As she did her business, the closet door began to shake violently, and the doorknob rattled violently as though something were trying to escape from the inside. She was horribly scared that she jumped off the toilet, pulled her pants up without using any toilet paper, and fled. It was often mischievous behavior. A few years later, we lost funding, and I had to move on to a different job. But I still see the house when I'm doing extensive bike rides in the area. The house, as a field location, also lost its funding, and has been vacant for some years now. Perhaps the spirits are happy that no one is there. About 15 years ago, my sister's family had to relocate from Michigan to Pennsylvania for career reasons. Their new home was actually within a few hours' drive of many American Revolution and Civil War sites of interest. My wife and I would make it a point to take a trip and see them at least every other year, and during our trips, we would always try and take at least a day trip to Gettysburg. Being the site of a major battle, there are plenty of ghost stories to be told, and as such you can find any number of companies offering ghost tours and night walks, and we were probably a little too interested in all things ghostly. Our first trip was great. We got to take the battlefield tour with my sister, as well as enjoy some fun shopping and the usual touristy things. We did not really see or sense anything on the battlefield tour, but there was a moment when we walked on the main street that I definitely caught the smell of gun smoke. It only lasted for a few seconds, so I didn't say anything, until I noticed a confused expression on my sister's face. That's when she looked at me and said, "Gun smoke?" I confirmed it as well, though, as I recall, we were the only 2 that noticed it at all. There was no demonstration going on at the time. We chose a ghost tour for the night, but nothing more noteworthy happened. It was a fun walk through the town at night, though. That was it. for our first time there, but our second adventure would prove to be much more eventful. Our second trip, we wanted to stay overnight in Gettysburg so that we could do a late-night ghost tour. We also had decided that we were going to stay at a bed and breakfast that was known to be haunted. I believe it was called the Tilly House Inn. There is a very awesome and inspiring backstory of a 15-year-old girl called Tilly who helped out soldiers during the war. The hauntings reported consistently include disembodied footsteps up the main staircase and generally all throughout the site. The voice of a young girl's laughter, as well as an apparition of a young girl. Reports of the sensation of someone sitting at the foot of the bed, as well as the feeling of being watched. And one specific room has been reported to be haunted by a soldier that will walk across the room, through the door to the hallway, down the stairs, and back to the room, finally resting on a chair by the bed that faces the main street of the town. We didn't really do much research into the hauntings before our stay, and only found out specific hauntings after the fact. So my experience there wasn't pre-programmed. During our stay, we took part in a live ghost hunt with a group of people led by a local professional. We were provided equipment similar to what they used in many ghost hunting shows popular at the time, which was cool to us. Aside from some hits on our EKG meter, nothing much happened. But it was a little distracting, as some of the other hunters were annoyingly loud and shouting the entire time. I can't blame them though, since that is often how we humans deal with potentially scary things. In any event, it was a fun experience and fun despite the other patrons. Following the ghost hunt, we grabbed some food and headed to our ghost tour location, which started a few buildings down from the Tilly house, where we were staying. So it was a convenient choice. The group gathered in a cellar under a restaurant, which was fitted with a dim light and haunted house-style decorations that fit the ambience perfectly. At this point, we could tell that this was a much higher production value than our previous ghost tour from a year prior, and we were definitely on board. Once everyone gathered, they gave us a sort of orientation to discuss the places we would be walking through. Our trajectory would take us through an old park, up a hill that overlooked a school that had been newly built up on a battlefield, and finally concluded at the Gettysburg National Cemetery, specifically a back corner that rested against some woods. During the orientation, I started to notice a few flashes of white towards the back of the room, and could not identify the source's cameras as they were not allowed at that point. Eventually, we were on our way. The first stop on the tour was more informational than anything, and though I found the stories interesting, I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. Our final stop was the cemetery, but we stopped a few yards away, and our tour guide gave us a brief history about the area of the cemetery where we were going to stop. At the moment, I had a feeling it was going to be a terrifying story to put the tour on the edge and more in the mood for ghosty stuff. I wasn't far off in my guess, as he related a story about the spirit of a young girl called Elizabeth. She, according to the story, was a young girl of around 11 from the Civil War period that fell fatally ill. Her parents were unable to provide medical help, so they had no other alternative than to let nature take its course. This tragically led to a slow and painful death over time. Because of this, as the story goes, Elizabeth has become a vengeful spirit at times and has been known to lure people into the woods, sometimes with tragic results. As the tour guide would say, some nights it's okay to go to the area of the cemetery, other nights it's not. He said that he had a trusted psychically sensitive friend who he checks with. His friend would call him before the tour, and concerned, and asked if he was planning on taking them to the Elizabeth part of the tour, and would give a stern warning on those nights. Of course, ever the skeptic, I took it with a grain of salt, and simply went along with the ride once he assured us that it was safe on this particular evening. Gathering ourselves, the crowd, a mixture of fear, skepticism, and excitement, we walked up the road to a small clearing inside of the wooded area near the cemetery. It was pretty dark at this point, but we were still pretty much in town, so it wasn't unbearable. When we all arrive, the guide ushers us all to a circle around him and starts to take some deep, slow breaths, sending positive energies out to keep the angry spirits at bay, should she find an interest in our group. I was looking around the surrounding trees and back to the woods as we gathered, when I froze, noticing a white flash of light darting around out from behind the trees. It was around the clearing, yet never came too close to the group. It could have been roughly the size of an 11-year-old girl, which sent shivers down my spine. That's when the tour guide began talking about potential ways Elizabeth may manifest, usually in the form of a white light that will dark around the clearing yet never come close. I regained my breath and kept my experience to myself. After the guide was confident it was safe, he allowed the amoeba of people to do a bit of exploration within the clearing, so long as we did not go into the woods. I, of course, immediately walked into the tree line and looked on into the woods in an attempt to see anything else back there. And sure enough, further out in the trees was another white flash of light. I noped back towards the cluster of people, as even my own high tolerance to ghosty things had found its limit within this creepy situation. Once I rejoined the group, I did take one last glance into the woods and thankfully didn't see anything. One last creepy thing did occur, however, though I am often wondering if it was just my mind playing tricks on me after my previous experience. You see, after my last glance into the woods, I turned back towards our tour guide, who was a few hundred yards ahead of us, and through my peripheral vision swore my wife, or at least another gal in the group, passed behind me and through the gap in the group. As I turned around to go join them, there was literally no one filling the gap, and my wife was on the opposite side of the group, talking to my sister. And if it had been another girl in the group, she would have had to move very fast to disappear into the mob like that, though I'm not ruling that opinion out. But it was a creepy way to end the tour for certain. After the tour, we said goodbye to my sister and her husband, and made our way back to the Tilly house to turn in for the night. It was a pretty busy place, and our neighbouring room was kind of loud, but not too annoying, so I couldn't complain. The evening continued without incident, and my wife and I talked about our experiences there, and how we really enjoyed the tour guide, discussed our plans for the next day, and went to sleep. Our room was definitely the room haunted by the soldier, though again we had no idea, which is why the final experience for our stay that year in Gettysburg are even more compelling. I am unfortunately a light sleeper, and usually need some kind of ambient noise to be able to fall asleep. Often having a box fan going at night, but our room has no such fan, so the slightest noise would wake me. To top this off, I was already having a bit of anxiety after experiencing the ghost tour. A bit of information on the setup of the room. It was a pretty good-sized room, with 2 dressers and a couch. Most of the decor was in a Civil War manner to enhance the experience of staying in such a historic place, with the bed positioned next to the only window in the room, which was to the left as you entered it. There was also a pair of closed doors on the right that could access the neighbouring room when opened. The headboard was up against the wall, so that one side of the bed would be facing the main part of the room, and the other was a few feet away from the window to allow side access to the bed. There was also a rocking chair next to the window and a nightstand on either side. So I was laying in bed, facing the window, as I usually do when sleeping, when I was jolted awake by a sense of a presence approaching the bed. I then heard a very definite creaking of hardwood floorboards, as if someone was walking into the room from the hall. Half asleep and slightly paranoid, I froze in bed for a second, then checked to see if my wife had maybe gotten up to use the bathroom, but she was fast asleep. The disembodied footsteps seemed to continue over to her side, then circle around the foot of the bed and over to mine. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and the left side of my body tingled with energy, as it tends to do when the paranormal is encountered. I felt something pass me by. Then the rocking chair by the window creaked along with the floor, as if something of substance just sat down. Initially, I was avoiding looking in that direction in case I saw something I didn't want to see. But finally, I couldn't help myself and turned towards the chair and window. I stared in awe between the ambient light and the street lamp and the darkness of the room, and I witnessed what I could only describe as the silhouette of a soldier in the chair, facing the window. Though it was very much a silhouette, I could make out the shape of some of its Civil War uniform down to the squared hat. I tried to mumble something like, "Hello there," then turned away and went to bed. Later, I would find that it's a common sensation in your room to witness the same thing, almost as if the remaining energy of a soldier is standing guard for those in the room, playing out the same routine time and time again. I don't know. The next day we left Gettysburg as planned and continued our vacation, and we've been there a handful of times before and since, but that trip has really stuck with me for a while. This happened after I got married. We had 2 young children at the time, and we have since moved from the house where this story took place. The place we lived in back in those days was really great. We lived on the top of a hill. The house was amazing and had a pretty big garden too. This was in a commuter town on the outskirts of a big city, which was the perfect place to raise our 2 young children. We were in love with the location and house, but on the night after we moved in, something strange happened. That night, despite the move and all the unpacking, I was unusually wide awake. I hated it because I really wanted to catch up on my sleep. When you have young children, you need all the sleep you can get, right? I shut my eyes and tried to force myself to sleep, but it wouldn't come. I was tossing and turning in the bed and just couldn't sleep. I guess that this might have been brought on by my nerves after starting life in this new home. When I checked my phone, I saw that it was past 2 a.m. I was bored of trying to sleep, so I decided to put my earphones in to listen to something on YouTube. I landed on some clips of one of my favorite TV shows and shut my eyes and tried to relax. My partner was sleeping soundly next to me, snoring. Our kids were in the bed too, and they were asleep, of course. I was the only one up. I was just pulling up the covers of my son to make sure he was warm, when I heard something that sounded like footsteps on the hardwood floor. My first thought was, someone's here. Then my mind went completely blank. I have heard people say that they were frozen in horror before, but I never thought I'd experience it myself. If you are the last one awake at home, the sound of unaccounted for footsteps in the dead of night is just about the most chilling sound I can imagine. A second thought came. Is this a break-in? A home invasion? Is there a burglar in my house? Then it was as if a switch had been flipped in my brain, and I prepared myself for war. I readied the only weapon I had available, my phone. I heard those footsteps rise up the stairs very slowly. Then my house fell silent. The room we were all sleeping in was the closest to the stairs on the left. In other words, the owner of those footsteps was right outside the bedroom door. I lay there still. I had no idea if whoever was out there had a weapon, but I knew one thing. They assumed I was asleep, and at least I would have the element of surprise if they tried to open the door to come in. I don't know how many minutes passed, but I lay there as still as possible, and whoever was just beyond the door stayed just as still as I did, because there was no sound. My partner had stopped snoring, and the whole house was dead quiet. I could hear the sound of my own heart beating. Tension had wrapped its icy fingers around my heart, and a long time had passed since I heard a footstep. That's when I began to doubt myself. Could I have imagined them? I waited for 5 minutes to pass and didn't hear anything out there. I was sure if there was a thief in the house, I would have heard them leave if they weren't going to come into the bedroom. I needed to find out. I slowly and silently approached the door and listened, but heard nothing. So, I summoned up all the courage I had to slide the door open, and for a second I thought I would see a man standing there in a ski mask. But to my relief, there was no one there. I went downstairs to check if the front door was locked, and it was. And I couldn't find any open windows or other unlocked doors. It was very strange for me, but I'm glad we weren't being robbed. Over the course of the next few weeks and months, I would hear phantom footsteps climbing the stairs at night. I had no explanation for what was happening, and every time I heard those footsteps, I would go in search of the source of the noise, but never find anything. Another strange occurrence was the fact that every time I climbed the stairs, I would feel some resistance when I reached a certain step, as if my leg were being pulled from behind. I didn't tell anyone in my family about this experience, and one day I came home from work to find my son crying. He said he was scared of the shadowy person on the stairs. He would refuse to go anywhere near the stairs at night. I'm sure that place was haunted, and I am glad we moved away. Me and my best friend hung out with another girl when we were younger. She was Kayla, and the other girl Summer. Summer's house was one of the original houses built in the city around 1830. We loved going into her mum's room because she had this huge bed and the ceilings were super high and lined with vintage suitcases. We're like 10 and finished watching a movie on there and started jumping on the bed like little hooligans. After a minute or so, we realized there were 4 of us on the bed. We immediately stopped and a shadow flew out the door. Didn't really go back in there until we were in the 9th grade. The 3 of us came back to Summer's house late one night after a concert. I don't know why she said this. She had a ton of mirrors all set up at certain angles so that no matter where you were in the room, you could see everything all around you. She said it was because her house was haunted. We were laying in bed watching TV, when in the mirror the light in her closet turns on. The door starts to open, and there's a large black shadow of a man standing there. But when we turn around, there's nothing in the closet. In the mirror, it's still there. A month or so later, Summer and I were skipping school with another friend who we'd never hung out with outside of school before. As we turned into Summer's walkway, this friend goes, "Is that your brother in the window?" We look up at her bedroom window and saw that same dark shadow standing there. Sure enough, we went in and no one was home. Summer was obviously fed up and freaked out. She asked her mum about it, who turned as white as a sheet. She told Summer that when she was young, she would see the shadows all over her room. Her mum, Summer's grandmother, cleansed the room with holy water and prayed for them to go away, and she never saw them again. But recently, she started doubting her faith, and they were slowly creeping back into her life. We ended up drifting apart after high school, and the last I heard, she moved away, but it always left me wondering. To start, I live on and off at my dad's farm, located in rural southern Brazil. The farm is located on what used to be a limestone quarry some 30 years ago. A few remnants of that time still remain strewn about the farm, such as an old minecart and its tracks, a huge brick limestone furnacey thing, some overgrown dirt paths where trucks used to drive, and some factory walls and equipment. The nearest town is about a 5-minute drive away and has around 10,000 people in it, consisting mostly of nice country folk. Most of the farm is a big forest area because it has a fazenda de reflorestamiento, meaning we sell trees and plant them again and such. The following events are in chronological order though. I can't pinpoint the exact day and month, but before I moved back here this year, I had spent the first half of 2022 here and moved back to my hometown for the later half of my final year of high school. My mom and my brother lived with me back in our hometown, as she was waiting for my brother to finish that year of middle school and for me to finish high school to move to the farm to join my dad and older sister, who were already living there full time. It was a cold night in early November of last year when my dad told me he and my sister were awoken by 2 large explosions in the woods behind our house. My dad, having been a gun owner, is well aware of a noise that a weapon can make, and said that this was nowhere near a gunshot and more along the realm of some sort of explosive detonation. The whole house seemed to shake and vibrate, and the windows also shook in a very intense way. Our guard dogs awoken and started barking like crazy in the direction of where the noise came from, but didn't move. At first I was quite skeptical of what my father and sister had told me, believing it was nothing more than a tall tale to scare me and my brother, who were just moving into town, and by extension, the farm. A few months later, in early 2023, my mum, my brother and I, as my sister had to go back to her house for a bit, and my dad, travelling for work, were woken up by the same noise and explosion my father and sister had described. I was laying in bed, preparing to fall asleep, when it happened, and it sounded like someone had blown up a gas tank a few meters from the house. The windows shook, and I desperately tried grabbing my phone to record the sound if there was another explosion, but in the pitch darkness of my room and the desperation of knowing what's going on, it made me forget I had left it plugged in at the outlet way across the room from my bed. A second explosion happened, and once again the walls and windows shook. I exited my room, just to find my brother and mum had done the same thing, both standing in the living room. My brother, who is 14, was visibly frightened by what had just happened, and was telling everyone to be quiet, just in case whatever had made the explosion could hear us. Me being the paranormal fan, I really wanted to look out the back window to see what made the noise, but instead did what I thought would be the safest option and closed every window and curtain in the house that was still open. I didn't want to see what made the noise, my mind trailing off into stories of aliens and skinwalkers and such, and I decided that I would be better off not looking than accidentally catching a glimpse of something that was out there. While closing one of the blinds, I did catch a glimpse of one of the guard dogs just sitting at the front of the garden, looking up over the house, as if to something in the tree canopy behind it. It was quite difficult to go back to sleep that night, but nothing more happened that day. Talking to my dad about what I had experienced, he said the explosions we had heard were just the same ones he had heard in November. Nothing weird happened for a while, until one day late at night, my mother was woken up by a very loud jet engine noise. We don't live near any major airports, and planes that do fly over us are usually very high up, so we can't hear them. It seemed to be coming from on top of our house, and only seemed to get louder and louder until it ceased instantly. Curiously enough, no one else was awoken that night. I also had one of those experiences with a loud jet engine noise. It was around 2 a.m, and I was laying down in the living room couch playing Fallout New Vega, doing the Boomer quest line, when I started hearing what I could only describe as a plane flying past our house, but never actually went anywhere, so all you heard was the same noise and it wouldn't stop. I was wearing headphones, so at first I just assumed that it was coming from the game, but when I removed them, I could still hear, and it sounded like it was coming from the top of the house. Freaked out by this, I saved my game, turned off all the lights and went to my room to be safe, or something along those lines, when it suddenly stopped. We've had some other experiences at this farm, like my parents and seemingly our dog seeing a ghost kid run past the house and disappear into the forest. Our neighbors telling us how she and her dad found some sort of Brazilian folklore beast called the corpo seco, which is basically a zombie wandering the forest, along with some other creepy stories from people that have lived around this area longer than I have. Me and some of my family members have had some other paranormal experiences happen to us, but so far, these are the only ones since we've moved here. This happened 2 years ago. when I was living in an all-woman dormitory. It was a bit of a nightmare. I hated having to share all my space at the time with others, but I managed to get kind of used to it. There was a shower on the first floor, no bathtub, just communal shower. There were 2 showers actually, but if you used the shower facing the door to the corridor, then everyone who walked in would see you. Most of the others in the dorm felt the same way about that shower. They hated it. No matter how much you tried to make the curtain hang in the right place, there was always a gap. With the other shower, there was a little more privacy since it was around a corner. If people heard the water running, they came in and would know you were in there around the corner. 1 good shower, 1 bad shower. We actually affectionately called it the bad shower. I guess there was something more to the shower though. We all just didn't like it, and I had a friend in my dorm who said she had the ability to sense the presence of spirits. You know, the 6th sense. Anyway, this friend of mine said that she had seen a kind of black mist, something like a fog, materialize in that shower cubicle. That kinda spooked me out. One summer night, I woke up and headed to the bathroom. I don't know what time it was. All I knew was that it was dark and everyone else was asleep. I used the bathroom as I was heading back to the corridor, and I heard the stall door to the bad shower bang. The sound was deafening. There was a kind of an unwritten rule about slamming doors at night, as it woke everyone up. I didn't want everyone to think it was me. I turned and froze in place. I was surprised because I thought I was the only one up. I was sure that there was no one else in the bathroom area with me, and I remember my first thought after that was, something's wrong. I began speed walking back to my room. I didn't like this situation. I felt as if I wasn't alone in the corridor, and it sent my heart racing. I sensed that there was something behind me, some kind of presence, and I knew something was behind me, but I didn't have the courage to look back and confirm it. I intuitively knew that it was what my friend had said that she had seen, the black mist. I heard my mind continue to repeat, "It's that thing from the bad shower again." I felt the chill of something right at my heels. I felt its icy cold presence at my neck, and most disturbingly, I felt the distance shorten between me and it. I couldn't keep it together any longer. I broke into a sprint and I raced back to my room. I slammed my door shut. I didn't care about the rules. I locked the thumb lock and crawled into bed. I don't know what that black mist thing was, but I didn't just sense it. I saw it, and it didn't appear to come into my room. I felt as if something was outside my door though, something waiting. Perhaps a sense of impatience that I saw with the shadows passing back and forth in the gap under the door. Or maybe it was because the sensor light in the corridor which detected light seemed to stay on for far too long. Maybe it was my imagination, but I don't think it was. I think there was something out there. I felt a gaze. We had a little window in our front door which was covered by a small curtain. It was like a small box-shaped window. Anyway, through a gap where the curtain didn't align against the frame of the window, I felt that gaze. There was something out there in the corridor, and nothing on earth will convince me otherwise. I was so terrified by it, I ended up putting the pillow over my face and the duvet. Before I knew it, it was morning. I went down to breakfast as normal and made sure to take a seat next to my friend, who had experienced the same black mist encounter that I had. I broached the subject and she said, "You know what? I went past the bad shower this morning and felt as if something had been lifted, as if something had moved, you know?" I knew that I had seen the same thing as her. I didn't see the black mist after that, and wonder where it went, and if it's still hanging around the dormitory. Thankfully, I have moved on. It was a horrible experience that I don't wish on anyone. This house was built somewhere in the middle of 1800s and has belonged to my family ever since. My great-great-grandparents built it from scratch when they moved from Italy to Uruguay. The backyard occupied an entire block, so it was pretty damn big. The house served as many things: a cinema, 2 churches, a bar, a clandestine abortion center, and many other stories. Sadly, a lot of people had died here. Some murdered, some natural deaths, other people decided to take their own life. The previous owners, some family friends, said that the last nights they spent there were almost unbearable. Doors and windows would open and close alone so fast they had to get out as quickly as they could. And the neighbors always told us that they could hear babies crying in the backyard, where they would bury the fetuses. Cousins of my mother had seen people in the bathroom mirror plenty of times. Smells would appear out of nowhere. It was a pretty messed up place. We moved in 2010, and almost immediately things started to happen. Stuff would be missing from where we left it. We could hear conversations in different languages in the backyard at night, but after searching there was no one there. But the thing that creeped the hell out of us were the apparitions. A few months after moving in, my mother woke up in the middle of the night, only to find out there was a man at the end of her bed with a black plastic bag covering his head. She didn't scream nor wake me, just closed her eyes and prayed until she fell asleep. Now this became a regular thing. We could see different people at any time in the house, and they would vanish into thin air. I remember once when I went to a sleepover at my cousin's house that was about the same as ours but divided by a wall. And when I woke up, I saw a woman watching me from behind a full-body mirror. It was midnight. I couldn't move, so I closed my eyes and decided she wasn't there anymore. When I opened them again, she had moved to the bedroom door, and when I closed my eyes and opened them once more, she had gone. We once discovered a picture in my cousin's house that appeared to be a baby from another time, judging by its clothes. And after contacting a medium, she told us that 6 different presences were living in the house with us. I could tell you 30 extra things that happened there since, but I just don't like living with the knowledge that they aren't going anywhere, and it was their first home. To them, we feel like intruders. About 2 years ago, a co-worker took his own life. Shortly after this, I cleaned out his workstation. I boxed up everything and delegated files to others and turned off his computer. His cubicle sat empty for months, maybe almost a year. One day I needed to see if he had a copy of an invoice or something. I can't remember exactly what, but I thought he might have scanned it and saved it on his desktop. I flick on his computer and was looking for the file. Just as I was about to shut it down again, I heard a scream from downstairs. A lady in our office received an instant message from the computer I was at. Now, I didn't open up Skype or the Teams app on his desktop. I just turned on the computer and looked in documents and desktop for what I was looking for and didn't find it, then shut it down. The instant message she received was weird too. The message didn't have anything in it, just a blank pop-up. No one else received anything from his computer. Lastly, whenever someone leaves our company, I usually reset all passwords, so since this app was attached to his 365 account, it would have asked me to update the password instead of just opening the app. Also, we knew he didn't leave a note before taking his life. Maybe he just wanted to reach out. Before I start telling you this, I want you to know that I still don't believe in ghosts. There is only one experience that I've had in my life to this date that has made me question my stance on the paranormal, or the beyond, or whatever. I have to say that because of this specific experience, I no longer have any right to say I can completely say there is no existence of the paranormal, and you'll soon understand why. This happened when I was in the 1st grade. I was really young. Now, I don't remember all that much about what happened before everything popped off, but it happened when I came home from school one afternoon and took a nap. I guess I must not have had a decent night's sleep the night before, because as soon as I got in and lied down on my bed, I was lights out. I say bed, but I want you to imagine a non-conventional bed. It all boils down to the blanket, duvet. Anyway, I've never had the thickest blankets on my bed. It was so flimsy it might as well have been a sheet. When I woke up from my after-school nap, it was dark. I thought it was night, but I couldn't be sure. I didn't think that my mum would have let me sleep through dinner, so I guessed it wasn't that late. The light in my bedroom was still on. When I woke up, I could see it through that thin blanket I mentioned earlier. I was groggy, but as I was just about to get to my feet and go see my family, I felt an intense pressure bearing down on me. A couple of shadows fell on top of the bed. I quickly identified that there were 4 hands. I could see them pretty clearly from within my blanket barrier because I had left my bedroom light on. 2 large hands and 2 small. I saw them. These hands landed on my blanket and essentially began to push me down, grounding me down with my back flat against the mattress. At that time, there would only have been me, my little brother, and my mum at home. Dad wouldn't have come back from work yet, so I had no doubt that the shadows in the hands that I felt belonged to my mum and brother. I figured they must have decided to play a prank on me, as my younger brother has always been a bit of a handful. It started off seemingly pretty playful, but quickly I felt more and more pressure being applied. I couldn't move. I was trying to fight against their hands, but I didn't have the strength. I wanted to get my hands out from under the blanket, but I couldn't. The bedding on top of me felt as if it were a vacuum sealing me to the bed. It was making it difficult to breathe. It was covering my mouth. I didn't like this. I managed to turn my head to the side and shout, "Let me go!" again and again. My mum and brother didn't say anything though. They just kept pushing their weight down on me. It was becoming incredibly painful. I couldn't take much more of it. And just when I thought that I was going to run out of oxygen, the covers were whipped off me. The light blinded me momentarily, but I heard a familiar voice, that which belonged to my younger brother. "What's wrong?" he asked. I quickly found out that my mum wasn't in the room with us. She was down the hall in the living room watching TV. It simply would have been impossible for her to be in 2 places at once, and it wasn't as if the living room was right next to my room. To get there running would have taken 10 seconds. I couldn't understand it. I felt 4 hands holding me down, 2 big hands and 2 small hands. I swear they were similar to my mum and brother's. However, there was one difference. The fingers felt like they became pointier at the ends. I've never been able to understand what happened that day. I asked my parents if we lived in a haunted house and they said we didn't. I've even asked them the same question as a teenager just in case they were trying to hide it from me in case I got scared. But no one else in my family had ever had any kind of paranormal experience within the house. I still can't work it out. I even asked my parents about the blanket, but they can't remember where they got it. Maybe it was related to that. But I don't know. It only ever happened once. And honestly, once was enough. I had a little experience before meeting my husband, but since being with him, I've had too many to count. We had to move to a new house, and the first night there is what started everything. My husband is a walking magnet for the paranormal and had a crazy dream about the house. In the dream, he said we were in bed watching TV, and when he looked down the hallway, he saw a lady standing at the end of it. At the same moment, she started screaming and running at us at full speed. A face print burned into the wall, and as soon as she reached him, he woke up physically screaming. After that night, things started to get weird. We'd hear people whispering, see shadows out of the corner of our eyes. We'd even get the ickiest feeling walking anywhere in the house. It got to the point where we all camped in the living room, and before it got dark, I'd grab everything I'd need for the night, and everyone refused to go into the room until morning, because for whatever reason, nothing would happen in that room. We'd sit and watch shadows peek around the corner throughout the night, and hear the whispers until we fell asleep. A few weeks into living there, my husband was taking the dog out and left the door open, and when he turned around to come in, he saw what he could only describe as the top hat man standing in the doorway and turning to walk through the house. It scared him so badly that he ran inside, and smoked the whole house out with the entire bundle of sage I had. Things only escalated from there, and I'd get this feeling of doom that sat so heavy on my chest that I had to go sit outside for it to go away. We eventually found out that an older man had passed away in the apartment below ours at some point. A few months into living there, the new tenant downstairs ended up having an electrical fire, which ultimately made everyone have to vacate. It's been a few years since we've lived there, and we still discuss it from time to time. The story that's about to be told occurred while I was 2 years old in my family's first house on Long Island. My father would always tell me this story as I grew up, and it has taken forever to sink in with me as my first experience with the paranormal. It was during Christmas time during 1998, and I was playing in the basement with my older brother who was 5 years old at the time. We were messing around with a Mickey Mouse toy that crawled when the on and off button was toggled. When this toy is turned on, it shouts, "Hello," in a Mickey Mouse tone, and "Goodbye" when it's turned off. Dinner was ready, and my father came into the basement to inform us. He picked and carried me up the stairs as my brother followed us. As we were walking up the stairs, the Mickey Mouse toy said goodbye, but it sounded different. We stopped midway up the stairs and looked at each other. My father questioned my older brother and asked if he had turned the toy off before leaving it, and he claimed he hadn't touched it at all. Neither me or my brother turned off the Mickey Mouse toy, and my dad continued up the stairs to get me settled into my high chair to start eating. During dinner, my dad received a call from our grandpa announcing the death of his sister, my dad's aunt. He hung up the phone and told us the news. My dad sat back down at the table after a few bites and decided to check the battery pack for the Mickey Mouse toy that was abandoned by my brother. He crept back down the stairs, approached the toy, and ripped off the Velcro back and glanced at the battery switch. The switch was still toggled on. My dad instantly felt a rush of goosebumps. Until this day, I genuinely believe my great aunt sent us a message through our Mickey Mouse crawling toy about her passing. I spent part of my life living in a house that was haunted, or maybe cursed, I don't know. There's a lot of backstory and several very significant ghost stories. I've never shared them before and would like to see what you make of them. Yesterday and today, I was forced to go back to this house to deal with a situation where my relative has barricaded himself inside with a knife, a sickle with a handle wrapped in duct tape, and was refusing to allow his mother in the home. All I could think as he told me his delusions of witches and curses was how much I felt I understood what he was talking about. He was misplacing this onto his mum. But him, feeling cursed and affected by an evil presence, I completely relate to. I left there today after he safely left the home, feeling paranoid and agitated, like people were looking at me, and I knew something was wrong. I felt like everyone at the grocery store was talking about me when I heard conversation around me. I feel somewhat better now, but I suspect there will be vivid nightmares and night terrors. To give you the backstory, the house was previously owned by a very nice family that happened to belong to a cult of Christian mystics who believe in communicating with the dead, but they were a very nice family otherwise. One summer in the middle of the day, the feeling in the house began to change. My mum was outside gardening, and I certainly didn't want to tell her that I was scared of the house in the middle of the day. She had enough on her plate. My grandfather once told me that electricity keeps ghosts away, so I began walking around the house, turning on every light we had. The air began to feel heavier, and everything looked a little different and darker. As I walked through the dining room archway into the living room, I saw, standing on the bare hardwood floors, a black mass maybe 3 feet high, the size of a big dog, looking at me. It didn't have a clear face, but I knew it was looking at me. If I had to say what it was shaped like, I would say a big cat or some kind of animal. but black as tar and not transparent. It appeared to be a physical, bodied thing, no texture, just black, corporeal shadow. I turned and ran as hard as I could out of the house. I clipped the doorframe as I left the house, spun around and fell off the porch onto the grass. Then I stood up, made sure I was safe, and went to watch my mum garden after a few minutes of recovery. I didn't tell her what I saw. I was well aware that I could not afford to move anywhere, and felt that I would be putting myself at risk, telling a story that sounded crazy. I'd love to hear what you guys make of the situation. I never had a paranormal experience. In fact, all I knew about ghosts or anything paranormal was what a typical 16-year-old would know from the movies. My family or friends had never discussed anything of the sort, and as such anything paranormal was truly the last thing on my mind. It was 1999, I was 16 years old, and worked at a global fast food chain at weekends while I was at school. It was a Sunday and I woke up, and as usual the first thing I would do is turn on the radio. Remember, this is back in the 90s. To get to your preferred station, you had to adjust the dial to tune into the FM frequency of your desired radio station, while mine was always on FM Midland Radio 103. So I get up, turn on the radio, get dressed and go downstairs getting ready for my 11 a.m. shift. I knew from the night before my mother, father, and then 11-year-old sister were going out of town for the day. So when I went downstairs for breakfast to an empty house, all was good. And I went to work. I worked a full shift and came home at around 6 p.m., expecting to find my family, but the house was still empty. I ran upstairs, desperate to change out of my greasy clothes and take a shower. As soon as I went to my room, I began my usual habit. Flick on the radio, and as soon as I turned the switch on, instead of Midland 103, I got hard static. I thought to myself it was a bit odd, and just moved it back, and assumed that my sister Chloe had done it. She was generally very mischievous. I thought nothing more of it. About a half hour later, the door opened, and I heard Chloe talking downstairs to someone on her phone. I wasn't really in the mood to go down, and that's when I heard the door open again and my parents arrive. Odd, I thought. When I went down, I looked around and asked where Chloe was. My parents told me that they had dropped her off at a friend's house before coming home. I look at them in disbelief and tell them that that's impossible. I heard her arrive around 5 minutes before they did. They stare at me perplexed, unsure what to say. I begin to insist, telling them that I wasn't lying, and that's when my blood ran cold. The looks on their faces confirmed that they were telling the truth. I'm not sure what I heard. I wish my story would end there, but it's just the beginning. After this, in the following weeks, I started noticing shadows in my bedroom that weren't cast from anything, just there. These really fast and brief shadows in the corner of my eye. I would only ever leave 2 to 3 inches of my curtain open, so there was tiny scope for anything to be reflecting from outside, casting shadows on my wall. There really was nothing outside though which could possibly create any. It was a dark back garden with trees, and I was on the first floor. To rationalize, I talked myself out of what was happening with the shadows, but it kept persisting night after night. On top of this, when I used to reach the midpoint, that's what I call the moment between being awake and falling asleep, I used to get this vibrating feeling, like a shake, as if I was being prevented from falling asleep. This went on for weeks, and I can't tell you the amount of sleepless nights I had. So this kept building and building up my anxiety, coupled with me doubting my sanity. It was getting unhealthy. I tried confiding in my mother, who thought I was either lying or high, but it got worse. One night when there was no television or shadows, I turned to my left side and there she was. It appeared to be like a faint green hologram. I could see the outline of a woman's body with long hands and fingers. I could see through the apparition. It was hollow and transparent green. I was so scared I couldn't lift my head and looked above her hands. I put the pillow over my head and said at least 30 Our Fathers without stopping and convinced myself it wasn't real. The incredible thing was after that night it was like the atmosphere changed. I never saw or felt anything else, and the room felt so much better after that. We moved into the house in '96, and the house was built in the 50s by a Mrs. Slater who raised a family long before we moved in. I had always been uncomfortable telling anyone about what happened, but one night, several years after my experience, me and my mother were having a nice chat and I brought up how I resented the fact she never listened to me about what I went through in that room. She apologized, but she was really empathetic about it, which caught me off guard. When I asked her why she was so understanding, she admitted that one night in my room, an ashtray came flying off the shelf and smashed into a wall, and then, when she got up a plastic cover from a radiator, the thermostat flew off on its own accord towards her. She also said in the weeks before this happened, she could swear she heard something whispering her name at nights. She admitted she was so terrified she was thinking to herself, "Just kill me and get it over with." That was 5 years ago, that conversation, and we had a very similar one last summer. I brought everything up and we spoke about it, and I asked if anything else has happened since then, and she nodded. That a few months prior, that her electric shower started on by itself. Now this is quite hard to do, as in order to start it you need to flick a power switch and then turn on the shower, which is a different switch. It was so loud she ran to her neighbors next door, and also mentioned that one night she heard an almighty thud in the attic, like someone slammed a very big suitcase just above her head. The only way into the attic, though, is a very small hatch. I have no doubt there are spirits or entities attached to the house, and they are capable of physical interaction. The odd time I stayed there, the lights were always on in my room. When I started dating my wife, I was 15, and her stepdad gave me this rock that had a dragon carved into it. It was cool actually, and it was heavy. I took it home and placed it in my room inside my entertainment center. As time went by, it became difficult to get a good night's sleep. I would wake up constantly and have trouble getting back to sleep. I also had increasingly suicidal thoughts. I began withdrawing myself from my family. One day I was watching my small nephew, and I was sitting outside on the phone. I was peering through the window to keep an eye on my nephew who was sleeping on the couch, when all of a sudden, a small dark shadow about 4 feet tall went from one room into my room. I immediately got chills, and was honestly too afraid to go back inside. Another time I was sleeping in my room, and I woke up to the same shadow standing over me, and I couldn't move or say anything. The moment I started praying, it descended into my room, and I was able to move again. I got up and ran out of the room and fell asleep on the couch. One day I was watching a program about hauntings, and they had mentioned how a demon attached itself to a doll. That's when it clicked on me that everything started happening once I got that rock dragon from my girlfriend's stepdad. I opened my entertainment center, but it was gone. I looked everywhere for it and never found it again. But since it disappeared, everything stopped. I was myself again, and no more shadow people or night terrors. There is only one small note, and I'm unsure if it's related, but during this time I developed type 2 diabetes, and I have always wondered if it had something to do with it. About 21-ish years ago, my mother was able to buy her first house and got a really good price. I remember being very excited to have my own bedroom, and every day after school, my mother would bring me to our new house while her and my grandmother cleaned up the place. And because I was there, I was able to pick my own room. The room I had chosen had an old Cheerio cabinet with an old creepy doll, an old music box, and a few other broken tools. I asked my mum if I could keep the music box, and started to play with it while my mother cleaned. Eventually, my grandmother found an old beaten-up journal, and my mother and her began to read it. There are two entries that I'll never forget. Why did she make me do this? She knows how I get. Why couldn't she have just kept her mouth shut? The second read, I miss her every day. I don't think I can go on without her anymore. I only heard these because I had eavesdropped on my mother and grandmother. They decided to get rid of the journal because of how creepy it was, but eventually moved it, and that's when the weirdness began to happen. My family were convinced the house might be haunted, but nothing directly happened until they did. Once I was watching TV, the pilot episode of Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide, when something strange happened to the TV. The volume went super high and the remote stopped working. My brother and stepdad ran in and the channel started to change as the volume got louder. My stepfather said something about being a deaf ghost, and then the volume went to mute, followed by the power going out. My stepdad looked at the breaker box and couldn't find anything wrong with it. The second encounter happened when my brother and his friends were playing on the computer and began to hear strange noises. They went to investigate and heard the sound of a train. We lived very far away from the train stations, as there was no possible way we could have heard them. But then they saw a red-haired girl standing in the living room. When they turned back, she was gone. The next happened when I was sitting in the dining room alone. My brother was in his room getting ready for our grandmother to pick us up and take us to her pool club. When I started eating, I felt something odd, and my chair legs broke. I slammed to the ground and I saw a black, shadowy figure. My brother and my dog ran towards me as he got freaked out. My stepdad came over to check what was wrong and said that it looked like the legs were kicked in. Bad things started to occur. I got sick, extremely sick, and nearly died. But after leaving the house, the bad energy followed, and we had misfortune in every house we lived in after that. The first one was black mold. In the second, our landlord forgot he promised our house to his in-laws, and the third had electrical issues that nearly burnt the house down. My brother had realized one of our blankets was in his closet when we had first moved into the Bayport house. He begged my parents to get rid of it, so one night when we were on a camping trip, my mother dropped the blanket into the fire, and everything seemed to get better, albeit slowly. But here's the crazy thing. The music box was stolen by my cousin when I was 10 and still living in the house at the time. And well, nothing but bad things started happening to him, and that eventually led to his death. But here are a few strange notes about that house. There was a stain on the maroon kitchen walls. It wasn't until I was older that I realized that that kind of stain only shows up if one is to paint over blood. The second is that the previous owner of the house reported his girlfriend as missing, not dead, and claimed she ran away after a fight. Interesting. The third is that the realtor who sold my mother the house had said the girl died in a car accident. But then why was there a large blood stain on our dining room wall? In the crawl space, which we could never access, and we were never given the key to, but if you were to go into the basement area where the crawl space would logically lead to, there was a door that was sealed away with black electrical tape, with pipes built over it. My stepfather and his own father looked into it once, and realized the pipes didn't connect to anything. One last weird note. When I was playing while my mother and grandmother were cleaning the house before we moved in, I saw something very strange. A shirtless child chasing a dog. Now at the time we didn't have a dog, but a year later we got my first dog, and she had stolen my t-shirt while I was getting dressed. I chased her, and realized as I did, I had seen that exact same thing 1 year earlier. I spent a lot of time at my mother's father's house in the woods of Michigan. My brother and I got lost a lot, but if we could find the train tracks, we could always get back. One time when I was around 8 and my brother 12, he didn't want me bothering him and ran away, leaving me alone in the woods. I was crying and wandering around when I came to a house with 2 horses in a pasture, and I went and knocked on the door for help. This lady, who looked like an older librarian, answered and looked really shocked. I whined about my brother leaving me, and she told me to stay at the door while she went back in for something and came out to walk me home. I was telling her about the train tracks, and she said she knew where they were. We get to the tracks, and I'm cheering and pointing in the direction of my grandpa's house. But when I turned back, she was gone. Not a trace of her. I went ahead and crossed the tracks and followed the path to my house. My brother was already back, and they were all outside about to go looking for me. Grandma had made dinner, and we all went in to eat. I told Grandma that I wanted to bake cookies for the lady that helped me. She thought that it was one of the neighbors until I said she had 2 pretty horses. Apparently none of the neighbors had horses, and when I said her house was on the opposite side of the tracks, she said that was all thick woods, and there was only houses on this side of the tracks. I was adamant about where I saw the lady in her house, so the next day Grandma packed a bunch of sandwiches up for a picnic in the woods to see where I saw the lady in her house. It was a long walk, but we made it to the pasture, except there was no house and no horses. The only thing in the pasture was my hat that I lost while wandering around before I found the lady's house. We still had our picnic. Not sure what I saw that day. Maybe it was a ghost. Back in the early 1990s, I worked trauma scene cleanup. If you don't know exactly what that is, we were the professionals that came in after the crime scene investigators left. We cleaned up crime scenes, unattended deaths, people taking their lives, accidental deaths, and sometimes even murders. As you can imagine, I have been in some pretty horrible situations. A lot of the scenes even made the local and national news coverage. We were on 24-hour call service, so it wasn't out of the ordinary to get calls in the middle of the night for some events. This one evening in particular came in just after 10 p.m. or so. By the time we arrived on scene, it was after 11 p.m. This time my crew consisted of my team leader and me, the supervisor. So it was just the 2 of us, and we figured we didn't need a third hand, so we handled the call. The sheriff's department released the scene to us. Our job wasn't to clean up the scene, but simply secure the site. We would do this service to a lot of public agencies, as they didn't have the ability to leave resources on site to secure the crime scene in this way. We were used to dealing with it, and most agencies used our services. The scene was in a well-to-do neighborhood, not millionaires, but people who were better than middle class. It was at the end of a cul-de-sac, a 2-story house with a long driveway leading up to it. We parked our truck at the end of the driveway and made our way to the scene. Most of the time, the deputies only told us to secure the scene, sign the papers allowing us onto the property, and they were off. We get up to the house. It was murder-suicide with arson. From what I gathered, the father took the life of his entire family, wife and kids, and that set the house ablaze, and ended up taking his own life in the living room. Of course, when we arrive on scene, the bodies are never still there, but what is left behind is blood, body fluids, and small fragments of brain matter. The coroner doesn't remove every tiny piece, but we're used to that. However, in this case, we were not there to clean anything up, but to secure the scene, which usually involved boarding up the structure, putting some locks on doors that were broken into by the fire department, and sometimes they cut holes in the roof to vent out the fire, or cut holes in the walls in search of hidden flames. As we entered the house, it was still very hot. Most people are unaware how long it takes for a building to cool after a fire. But in contrast with the crisp, cool air outside to the hot, humid smoke filled inside, you begin to sweat a lot, and the dust mask doesn't help. We had a lot of windows to board up, and were used to boarding them up from the inside since it was already damaged, and we would drill screws into the plywood. The reason it's so important to do this is because some sites like these become an attractive scene for kids and teens, and even some adults, who'll break in to see what happened out of morbid curiosity and any valuables left over in the home. We had to chase teens and homeless away, so it's not entirely out of the realm of finding people already snuck inside. As we were in, it was hot, and we're sweating, as in all the fires and utilities are shut off, and we had a mounted generator in our truck that would run extension cords and used battery-powered lanterns. My co-worker and I were in the process of boarding up the back windows that were in the kitchen and dining room, and it was dark and getting darker as we placed each board over an opening and shut out any moonlight coming in. As we were working on the windows of the kitchen, I felt like I saw a shadow behind me. I just thought it was my imagination and didn't say anything to my co-worker. We both heard a loud thud from upstairs that made both of us jump at first. However, we've both been doing this type of work for years at this point and knew that homes that suffered fire often made loud noises as the water mixed with the intense heat makes the wood expand and pop. So we just assumed it was that. Not a moment later, I saw my co-worker turn from and look behind him. He did it in a way where you would expect someone to be defensive, like expecting someone to confront someone. He turned and looked at me, and I said something like, "I've been seeing shadows." He looked at me with a look of concern and said that he had too. Just then we heard more noises from upstairs. It actually sounded not like the house settling from the fire, but as if someone were upstairs going through things. We used to carry hammer hatchets, and sometimes we would need to cut things, like using an axe and hammer thing. So we also considered it a defensive weapon should we ever need it. We grabbed our lights and headed up, and we were fully expecting to find some teen or burglar ransacking for valuables, and since we are not there in a security type form, we just usually tell people to leave or we'll lock them inside and call the cops. Most of the time the people we've encountered seem more afraid of us, but we were also somewhat afraid of them. We went room to room looking for the intruder and found nothing other than the signs of the murder that happened upstairs. It's funny, but back then the bloodstains and bloody handprints of the last moments of someone trying to escape with their lives didn't affect me as much as seeing everyday mundane things like kids' toys, or the bathroom where maybe the eldest daughter left all her makeup and hair stuff for the last time that she got ready for that day, or the food left on the table for dinner. I can't explain it, but it's almost like most everyday things affect me, because it was like their life was normal, up until the moment it was taken from them. We headed back downstairs and say to each other that we're letting our minds mess with us, and if you'd have known me back then, I wouldn't be scared easily, as by the time I'd seen too much and been to other people's nightmares almost on a daily basis. As we're working, we both jump and look behind us because we keep seeing shadows. Now, some might think it might have just been cars driving by or something outside, but this wasn't the case, given the position of the house in the cul-de-sac. Not to mention, as we were boarding up the windows downstairs, the shadows we were seeing were coming from areas that the dad took his life in. We were finishing up a window that was next to a garage door that led from the house to the garage, when we heard very loud footsteps from above, like if someone was walking really heavy from one side of the house to the other. We both jump up and grab our hatchets and flashlights, and if you'd have seen us, it must have been a funny sight, because we went up and acted like we saw in the movies, like I stood in the upstairs hallway while my co-worker cleared the room, and then he stood in the hallway and I cleared the room. In our minds we were like action heroes, but I'm sure if someone saw us we must have looked very stupid. Our thinking was that no one was going to get by us without being seen. Again, we searched everywhere, under beds, in closets, heck, even in the showers. Nothing, and no one. We tell ourselves it's our minds playing tricks on us. We go back downstairs to try and finish the rest of the windows and doors. We still jump because we keep seeing the shadows. Just as we're about done with the windows downstairs and bolting up the back door, we once again heard a loud bang, like something really big and heavy fell over. It was so big that we felt it shake the house. We once again marched upstairs, this time not expecting to find anyone, but if something had collapsed, we needed to either put caution tape or try and secure it. We went upstairs and found nothing. Everything was the same. We couldn't explain the loud boom. The thing is, the majority of the fire damage was downstairs. The upstairs did have extensive smoke damage, but what I assume is that the dad of the house poured gasoline downstairs and then started the fire, and then took his life. So the majority of the fire was where we were working and not upstairs. We decided at that point that our job was complete. The only thing left to do was close the front door, and since the fire department used an entry tool to bust the front door open, it wouldn't lock on its own. So in cases like that, we drill a latch in like you would put on a gate, and padlock it. I was drilling in the latch as my co-worker was putting all our tools in the truck. As he came back up to me as I was putting in the last screw, we closed the door and put the lock on. And just from the inside we heard and felt bang, bang, bang. Someone or something was pounding on the door from the inside. I jumped back and turned to look at my co-worker who was running to the truck and is starting the ignition. I see he's already pulling out of the driveway, so I start to run with the drill and keys in hand, and I'm calling out to him to wait. Then I finally jump into the truck, and he's leaving that neighborhood quickly. We get on a major street heading for the freeway, and I suddenly remember the back of the truck is open. I tell him to pull over to let me close it. He said screw that, and that he isn't pulling over until we get back to the shop. I finally manage to make him stop. I get out and close the back of the truck, and ask him to let me drive. We never went back to the site after that. We told the story a few times to other co-workers and friends, but we would get funny looks and people trying to play it down, as if we let our imaginations get away with us. I've always felt something was really bad in that house, and whatever it was, it didn't like us there. I am a single mother of my one and only son. We've been living in our house a long time, and it's starting to take a toll on us. My son is 15 and has always been very sensitive to the paranormal, just like I've been my entire life. He's a very sweet and good-natured boy, but is shy and doesn't like to associate too much with people, but has always been attached to me. I had a very good friend named Ali. We were childhood besties, but she tragically passed when we were 19. I gave birth to my son when I was 21, so we never even met her. So he hadn't ever meant anything to her, but we always discussed that if we had children, we would be there for each other's kids and have them grow up together. My son would tell me when he was only 4 years old that he would see a lady standing in the corner by the television who would signal for him to come over. It would confuse me as I didn't see anyone to where he'd be pointing. I asked him what he meant, and he would say, "Mama, the lady with brown hair and blue eyes is waving at me. Who is she?" When he described her to me, I was in complete shock, as I knew he couldn't have been making it up. He was describing my best friend. I was in complete shock as I knew he couldn't have been making it up. He was describing my best friend. He had never even seen her before. I pretty much put off telling him about Ali, who would have been his godmother, until he turned at least 10. Yet here he was describing her to me when he hadn't even seen a picture of her. I guess that was her way of keeping her end of the promise. She was coming to check on us, but specifically my son. My son doesn't remember, but he has always mentioned he'd seen a similar girl in his dreams that looks exactly like Ali. My son has also started seeing an old woman in the house. From what he told me, he stated that when he got home, he was heading up to his room. He looked back to the downstairs level, and when he did, he saw an old woman walk by and briefly look at him before she vanished in a split second. My house that I have been living in was built in the 1880s. My great-grandfather bought this house from an old man right after World War II. Sometimes at 2 a.m., I'll feel the presence of this old man near my bedside, and it really freaks me out, but when I look there'll be no one there. My son also mentioned that at 3 a.m. he will start to hear footsteps from time to time. When my mother comes to visit, she always says she senses the apparition of a young girl around age 6. I've seen this girl myself, but I haven't told anyone about it. This girl was wearing pigtails and had blonde hair. I've seen her a few times. I even saw her from the window once when I got home from work. She was in the window of the attic. It was pretty freaky, but I sense this girl has a good side to her and is meant to be an angel, but I could be wrong. Well, one evening when I was getting out of the shower and getting ready to put my clothes back on, I suddenly felt someone hit my back. I turned around, not knowing who was there, but I didn't see anyone. When I turned back around to look in the mirror, I saw a young girl, maybe around age 10. She was wearing a long white dress and was barefoot. She was gone in the blink of an eye, but I know what I saw. The next day, I ended up finding a handprint on my back. It was 2 a.m. and I would hear loud bangs from our kitchen with cabinets being slammed and plates being moved around. My son is very scared of his room and claims to have seen the old woman in there looking at him from the closet. The same one I previously mentioned. It's gotten so bad he now comes and sleeps in my bed. He's petrified of his room and I don't blame him. I get the same vibe. It's getting to the point where we can't take it anymore, and I just don't know what to do. I'm planning on looking at new houses for rent, and we might move in with my parents. Anything would be better for my son and I. We'll go anywhere and leave everything behind. I just want him to be okay, as this house has taken such a big toll on both of us. I used to see faces coming out of the darkness of the hallway, so I would never sit in a way that I could see the hallway from the living room. One day I was sitting on the couch reading, and I saw a bright flash from the laundry room. I went to see what it was, but there was nothing in that room that could have made a flash. Another time I was in my dad's office, which doubled as my older brother's room once he got older, watching TV with my older brother before bed, and he fell asleep, but I was still awake. Suddenly, a nylon balloon that my youngest brother had brought into the room earlier began moving to the corner of the room. This wouldn't have been odd, but there was no AC on nor fan. It was just being pulled by the string. Speaking of my older brother, he had exactly one experience in the house. One evening he had eaten some ice cream and went to place his spoon in the sink. After doing so, he left the kitchen, but as he was walking out, he heard a metallic clatter. He turned around and saw that the spoon was in the middle of the floor. He simply picked it up and put it back. Once I was waiting for my grandmother to pick me up and bring me to my mum's house. I was home alone. I had gathered most of my things and was sitting at the kitchen table having some lunch. When I finished, I went to get my last bag from my room. I pushed the chair in before I left the kitchen, but when I came back it was pulled all the way out and was resting by the sink about 3 feet away from where I left it. I grabbed all of my things and waited outside until my grandmother arrived, and finally, once I was in the living room attached to the kitchen reading, when I heard the chime on our door go off. It wasn't an electronic chime. It was just a regular wind chime we attached to the blinds of the door leading to the garage. The garage entrance led directly into the kitchen. The garage door was always closed, and no one was due to come home for hours. My stepmom and brother were in the back of the house, and I heard no footsteps, but I hid and looked to see if someone would walk in. No one came. My stepmom walked out while I was hiding, and I told her what happened. We looked around, and there was no one to be seen. I don't personally believe in ghosts, but the other night I was in my room, and my dog started randomly barking downstairs, which he normally doesn't do. I went to the top of the stairs to check on him, and he was looking at me with his toy and wagging his tail, as if he wanted to play. He's normally very well behaved, so this was very weird behavior for him at 11 p.m. at night. Anyway, only 20 to 30 minutes after that, for the rest of the night, I was hearing constant noises, bumps, scratches, things moving, and at one point I heard very clearly a door creak open, but I couldn't figure out which door it was. It really sounded like someone was rummaging around upstairs. In the morning I checked and nothing was missing or moved. Last night I was hearing some noises again, but nothing too crazy, so I ignored it. But tonight, I was hearing some noises and ignored it. But I just went to the bathroom, and I can very clearly hear someone sitting down on my office chair, as it makes a loud creak when you sit on it or move around. It's unmistakable, and it was coming right from my room. I was honestly too scared to leave the bathroom. But maybe it's just nothing? I don't know. I have that sinister feeling that my house might be haunted. In 2013, I was in my hometown while my parents shifted to this new place. I'm 17 years old now, and before starting, let me tell you that I have been seeing these things, and I don't know why, since childhood. Maybe I had a certain connection, but I don't know. The place I live is famous for murders and stuff in the old times. The colony I live in is built up just on the side of a cemetery, and by killing the owner of the land, so it has a dark history. Certainly, everything was totally fine until one day when I came back from a movie at around 2 a.m, and I saw a dark shadow hanging from a wire. I couldn't believe it. I did a double take, and it was still hanging there, almost like it was staring at me. I ignored it for a while, thinking it must be something else. I then saw that same figure many times at that certain time of night on my roof. I got scared, but I was used to it, so I didn't mind. Neither did I tell my mum. I used to go upstairs at night talking to friends or something a lot. I was all alone. I didn't even know if this thing existed there, maybe even looking at me. Until one day I heard those noises. Some footsteps running on the roof, because above my room is our rooftop. And I heard someone running around 1 to 2 a.m. at night, constantly for hours, which isn't even humanly possible. I ignored it, and then my mum noticed it too. Someone was running and banging on the floor constantly. The next day, she asked our maid what was happening, and she said that we're not the only ones experiencing this. Anyone who's lived on the top floor has experienced it to this date, and that there's a spirit who runs every night for hours. People didn't believe it, but a family member left this home because of it. I got chills knowing that, and to this date, even last night, I heard and hear footsteps running very heavily and fast around the roof or banging something on the floor. It was all bearable until I got a knock on the window at midnight. It's never hurt me or anyone though, so far so good, I guess. This happened when I lived in Hachioji. I was in university at the time. I moved to Tokyo from Chiba, and I lived in 3 different places when I moved to Tokyo. This experience takes place in the second apartment I moved into. I found an apartment I liked. The building was pretty old, but it had just been renovated. The structure and layout of the apartment was really unique as soon as I viewed it. I expressed my interest to the realtor and then contracted it. I had a girlfriend and she moved in with me. Let me just explain the layout of that apartment. It was on the 2nd floor of the building and in the corner. It was strange and cool because I had my own personal staircase, which was connected to my apartment, and there was also a parking spot just below this private staircase which made life easy. If you open the front door, you'll see the toilet on your right and the kitchen just down the hall behind it on the right. There are stairs on the left and the entrance to the living room next to them. If you head up the stairs, you find a door leading to the attic. I really liked that attic. So like I said, the floor plan was pretty unusual. However, shortly after moving in, the weird goings-on began. My girlfriend loved the place as much as I did, and one day we were sat in the lounge drinking booze and watching some TV, when we both heard the sound of the door handle.
My girlfriend instantly went to panic mode and began freaking out. I tried to laugh it off and said something along the lines of, "Chill out, it's just wind." I would be lying if I said that my heart hadn't skipped a beat. I was just trying to stay calm and composed. It definitely sounded like the door. A few seconds later, the sound came again. This time she started to really panic. She was close to tears. Now, what kind of man or boyfriend would I be if I didn't go and check it out? So I asked her to wait there while I went to see where the noise was coming from. But I was bricking it in reality. It was very stressful. I came out of the lounge and faced the front door, and I saw something. I saw what was causing the noise. Before my eyes, the front door handle moved up and down, like there was someone outside trying to gain entrance. Panic had set it in for me now, as the door handle rattled and the door moved. It sounded like there was some real force behind it. I realized that the door wasn't locked, and as that thought came to me, the door flew open. I expected to see some masked-wielding maniac, but there was none there. That particular fear slowly fizzled away, and I called out to my girlfriend, "Oh hey, don't worry. It was just some garbage blowing by the wind making the noise." I lied to her in an attempt to reassure her. Despite no one being behind the door, I still felt fear. The things which are unseen are the most frightening. The things which defy logic and reason are the most frightening. I decided to try and forget about it and carry on, stuff it down with brown. I'm not that good at drinking. I'm kind of a lightweight and always end up feeling sick. That day was really strange though. I didn't drink much and I began to almost hyperventilate. My breathing got fast, I felt hazy and dull. It was as if I was looking through a yellow filter. Everything had a yellowish tinge to it. Something was definitely wrong. I felt as though I would either die or faint, and I'm not being melodramatic. Things really escalated. I sat there panicking silently and internally until I couldn't bear it any longer. I turned to my girlfriend and asked through labored breaths for her to call an ambulance. She did. An ambulance arrived and I was taken to the hospital. While there, I was informed I had suffered hyperventilation, which they assumed was likely brought on by some sort of stress factor. They said my symptoms had already begun to subside. And as you know, I was just at home sitting around drinking, so how on earth did that suddenly happen? I didn't feel stressed anymore. I just asked to leave, and we called a taxi to go home. Well, I was pretty concerned, and that had never happened to me before, so I called my mum and asked for her opinion. I'll digress for just a second and tell you about her. She's always believed that she has had the power to sense the presence of spirits, and I don't think I have such an ability. It sounds like the early symptoms of possession. You need to be really careful, is what she said to me. That really creeped me out. The hyperventilation turned out to be a regular thing. I learned how to manage it better, but with each bout I decided I didn't want to live in the apartment anymore. There was just something quite wrong there. I tried to get out as soon as possible. My girlfriend was also in agreement that she wanted to leave soon. She could see something was affecting me. I tried to stay out of the apartment as much as I could. As soon as my classes would end, I would try and find other things to do outside to keep me busy. I'd go play the slots now and then, and I wasn't even interested before, and I don't play them anymore. It was a strange, short-lived hobby. After that, I'd pick up my girlfriend from her office job and head home. About a month from the door incident, one evening, we came back to the apartment. Like I said, there was a spot right by the stairs which I always liked to park in. However, when we got there was a bunch of people in the car park, and I noticed that one of them was a monk, and the others were all wearing mourning attire. There was a bouquet of flowers and lit incense sticks, which was a very strange sight to see. My girlfriend and I felt a little panicked. We parked away from them in a different spot, and I headed over to ask what was going on. The monk just smiled and replied, "Oh, don't worry, things are going to be fine now." I didn't understand, and I asked him to explain what he meant. and then a woman in her 50s stepped forward. "I think I can explain. My husband ended things here. I'm sorry." My mouth hung open. Apparently, he took his life in our apartment only a few days before we moved in. I was stunned but asked, "Why are you doing this now then?" The monk then said that there was a shared belief that the woman's husband hadn't passed over, but now with the help of the mourners and the ritual he performed, he believed he would be at peace. I wasn't certain that I could trust if the man's spirit was truly at peace. What I felt in those bouts of hyperventilation were profound levels of fear, the likes of which I would never want to experience again. So despite the reassurances of the monk, I complained to the landlord and moved out. I'm happy to say that the hyperventilation episode stopped instantly, and my girlfriend and I live a far more comfortable life.
So we moved into a new home rental. We had just moved most of our stuff into the house, but had not yet unpacked, and most of our stuff was still in the main room on the ground floor. My mother wanted to check out the park nearby, and took my brother and 2 sisters with her while I decided to stay home and help my dad unpack. We had a cat that had given birth to 6 kittens, and also a dog. While we were unpacking, the dog had hidden under the couch, which was a bit strange, but we thought that perhaps he was just scared of being in a new place. But then the kittens started hissing and puffing up at their fur, at presumably nothing. And then we heard a weird noise coming from upstairs, which happened to be the direction the kittens were facing when they started hissing. My dad immediately thought perhaps there was a squatter or intruder. He grabbed a baseball bat and told me to stay put. He comes back down shortly after and is white as a sheet. He told me to come home with him, and in one of the rooms upstairs he showed me an old wooden chair, which was not unusual. But what was, is the chair had a perfect circle worn into the wood, as if the chair had spun on one leg and worn into the wood. There was fresh sawdust still in the groove. My father said that when he went into that room, the chair was moving on its own, and stopped the moment he opened the door. A lot of other weird stuff happened after that. A few times pictures flew off the wall. We would hear people talking in the hallway at night in hushed voices or random bangings in the wall. We moved out only after a year, because it was all just too creepy. I don't believe my house is haunted, but I just happened to experience a few unusual events that have me scratching my head. Let me see what you think. To preface this, I have 4 kids, and it's not unusual to hear one of them wake up at night and call me. It's one of the reasons I never get a solid night's sleep, that and the fact that I'm a very light sleeper. Well, on this particular night last week, I woke up hearing my daughter call, "Mom." Confused, I went into my half-asleep autopilot mode and got out of bed. Everyone was asleep. Then I realized why I felt confused. I had heard 2 voices call for me at roughly the same time, from different parts of the house. One was just, "Mom," and the other, "Mom." There was a noticeable difference between the 2, at least for me. So, like any good mother, I rolled out of bed and made my way towards her room to investigate what was wrong. The fact that I heard a sound from a different part of the house was sort of throwing me, and halfway to her room did I stop in my tracks and realize that it was impossible, as she was not in the house at all, but she was at her grandmother's house, and she rarely calls for me anymore because she's 8 and a big girl now. I told myself I must have dreamt it. In the morning, I was loading my kids up to drive my boyfriend to work. I have this weird feeling of Sasquatches coming to grab my kids from the car, so I make sure to always close the door. I live in a populated area with small pockets of forest surrounded by city and vast national forests, so in my opinion it could happen. Anyway, Me and my boyfriend came back out with the other two kids. One of them was already in the car. That's when my 5-year-old son tells me that he heard someone laughing in the yard when I had gone inside. I was freaked out. There was no one around, and I worked on leaving as quickly as possible. It was just before twilight, and our porch light doesn't make it around the corner of the house where the car is. That was strange. That, and the middle stake in our chicken wire fence, was flipped over. It hadn't been like that the night before. My bedroom window is directly in front of my car and that fence, so I usually know its state. But who would knock the fence over when the driveway was open and accessible? I figured it was an exceptionally big squirrel that did it on a trip for a midnight snack at the bird feeder. On the drive, I asked my son about the laugh he heard. He said he heard it outside of his head, and that it came from the climb and slide toy, and it sounded like a boy was laughing with a sore throat. On the way home, my son fell asleep, and I heard him made a noise in his sleep. The ambient noise was loud, so I couldn't tell if he giggled or whimpered. I called his name and asked if he was dreaming about laughing, and he said yes, and that it was funny. I was relieved at this. My son is pretty sensitive and would be scared if his dream was something creepy. When we got home, it was the beginning of dawn, and I sat in the car until there was sufficient light. I let my dog out first, as I usually let him case the neighborhood in case black bears come into the yard dumpster. Uncharacteristically though, he began running all around the yard with his nose to the ground. He went to areas he usually doesn't scout, and I told myself that he sensed my unease, and he wanted to be a thorough good boy. Nothing has happened before or since, but these seemingly unconnected events have definitely left a weird taste in my mouth, and I wonder what you guys think. This story happened 3 years ago, when I was 15 in my village. My village is located in a rural area that is protected by the government because it's been considered a natural paradise for the last 30 years. This means that exploration in the area is quite difficult nowadays since it's forbidden to cut trees, which means that it is a huge forest. I was spending my summer there, and my favorite thing to do was to go hiking. Although I had never gone alone into the woods, just roads with people, my grandma told me that the forestry service had come and opened an old path that had been covered in bushes and trees for the last 30 years because of a race that was being prepared. Usually I'd go to the nearest town about an hour away by foot, and the only way I knew was by the road. But on the way back, I decided to try the new path out. The first part of the path was the easiest. There were many obstacles and landslides, but it was nothing compared to the rest. The second part was a hill full of rocks that was the hardest thing to climb. I had to literally go up on all fours like an animal. When I reached the top, I looked around and found some animal bones, and didn't pay too much attention since the area is known for its big population of wolves and bears. I continued the way faster than before. This part was plain, so it was a relief until I got to a dead end. Some huge tree had fallen exactly on a row on the path, and it was going to be very challenging to cross. This seemed really strange to me because there were no other fallen trees. Aside from those trees, there was a little barn in the middle of the woods. I thought to myself that it was probably abandoned, so I decided to throw my bag into the little field that belonged to the barn, and then I crossed the fence. I crossed it running without realizing the most bizarre thing. The field had no trees. It was clear. No bushes, no big plants, nothing. It really shouldn't be like that if it was abandoned. I started feeling a bit concerned about how the location and the fallen tree was so coincidental, and how there casually was a barn beside with a clear field, when the path had been closed for 30 years. It just seemed a bit off. I went on, and luckily I was reaching the last hill that my grandma had described, the one that connected with the village, when suddenly the woods went silent, which allowed me to hear some branches crackling from behind me. I thought to myself it must be a bird, but it came closer. Then it sounded like footsteps. After trying to convince myself it was surely just an animal, I started walking faster, and the footsteps did too. I started running, and after noticing that, so did the footsteps. I was running for my life at this point, and suddenly I started hearing incredibly loud grunts. Everything was going really fast. Luckily, I got to my village in a minute or so after that. I got into the patio of the first house I found and closed the door. It was a relative's house, and I stayed there for 10 minutes until I got my breath back and just went home. I just get chills from remembering that place, not having signal in the middle of nowhere and the grunts. It makes me think there was someone following me from the barn. I never went into the woods alone after that.